Hello, and welcome to Half Hour Call, the podcast where we talk about all things live theater, TV, film, basically entertainment in general. I am your host, Rich Kless, and today we are on part two of our interview with Jim Hoare from Theatrical Rights Worldwide. So let's get right back into it. Enjoy. It's what, in terms of not just the artistic side of things, are you also looking out in terms of keeping them financially correct in terms of making sure they're paying the right amount and things like that,
Oh,
and
sure.
is going there? Because I do know I worked with one time, and I know you worked with the guy who wrote King of Hearts representing
Hmm.
himself. And the time that I think I had contacted you, we did it here in North Carolina. He wanted an astronomical amount, and I was on the board of directors, and I was like, dude, there's like me and four other people who know this show exists.
Right.
Talking about, I'm not paying you that much for this, you know. And I being it wasn't it's because I was on the board and I have a lot more business background than the artistic director did, that I got involved with the negotiations and was like, let's get it back down to a realistic place here, because
Yeah.
I love that show. I love working on that show. It's very great. It's well written, it's funny, the music is nice, but I was not going to have anybody paying that obscene amount of money that he wanted to do it just because nobody had done it in 20 years. Yeah,
Sometimes authors or their agents get in the way of something that could be good.
right. And it might have
And
been his agent too. I don't remember, but it was a negotiation.
we rarely deal with authors directly. We deal with their agents mostly.
Right.
And their agents, that's their job, is try to get as much as they possibly can. But once a show is signed,
Right.
um, like for Title I school, for example, where all the kids are getting, lunches and books in school, and um, we have room to wiggle to make a show more affordable,
Right.
and where they're not charging for tickets or something. And then we have high schools that charge $25 a ticket. So your royalty is generally based on a percentage of your ticket sale, which is generally around 15%.
Yeah.
So for
It,
$10 ticket, $1.50 goes to royalties.
it's like that everywhere, because again, here I know in Durham, North Carolina, to get somebody to even charge you for a ticket is a lot, and it's the same. It's similar to sports. I mean, in Durham, they beg you to come see a football game, but in Texas, where my brother lives, he's in Allen, Texas. Tickets for a high school football game down there are $65 a piece.
Holy man. Well, that's how they spend all that money on the coaches' salaries.
Right, but it's the same thing. Is it depends upon the area, it depends upon what's going on around, that kind of thing. It's definitely um in a place like in Raleigh, it's a little bit more arts exposed than Durham. So, Durham has a little bit more um, flexibility, and wants to present stuff for free. Durham is also a lot more um, in the non-mainstream arts of things. They're looking not for the big musicals and things like
Right.
we have
Um,
DPAC for that, which is oddly enough one of the most attended theaters where like all the tours come in the country. But that's exclusively it. Once you get out of there, like there's not a whole lot of musical theater companies just in this town at all.
right.
It's none.
And as far as, like you said, the money part of it is, every author has Google alerts,
Hmm.
as do we. Most of them come to me and someone else on our staff. So I'll be able to look and see that, North Carolina University of, Duke is doing what production, and I'll be able to say, oh yeah, they have a license. And the authors will check it against our website because we have upcoming productions. So every once in a while, an author will say, hey, I got this Google alert for this school doing my show, and I don't see it on your upcoming productions. And 99 times out of 100, it hasn't been posted yet.
Right, right.
But every once in a while,
Oh
there
yeah.
is one because somebody borrowed the scripts from somebody else.
Well, I can tell
Or
you with colleges and stuff like that. I mean, a lot of students just think, "Oh, I can just do this," and you're like, "That's not the way it works."
it's the authors deserve to be compensated for their work that they've created. And one time, my favorite of all was, I got a phone call and I could hear it was a younger person who said, we're doing All Shook Up out here in California, And my teacher always gets a license for one weekend, but we always do 2 weekends. And I said, really?
Isn't that nice of them?
So I looked it up in the computer. I said, look, they do have a license for one weekend. And I looked at their school website and I said, oh, look, they are doing 2 weekends. So I said, why are you calling me?
Mm.
And I finally got her to admit, I said, I'm not asking your name. I'm just really curious. She didn't get cast as the lead.
Ah,
So she ratted out, her teacher.
nice.
Um, and then, of course, all I did was I sent an email to the teacher with a link to the website. I said, hey, congratulations. I see you've extended. Here's the invoice for the royalties due for week two,
That's
which
very,
he quickly paid.
very PC way to do that. Very good.
Yes.
Slipping it in there. Um, Let me ask you to switch directions here a second, and let me ask you about your books for a second. Again, as a person who likes to write but has never gotten the nerve to put something together into a single binder. Um, your first book, your high school improv show, what was your inspiration to write that? Since I'm assuming that was your first book.
Yes. It was really it was a suggestion actually from a former student. So we used to do a lot of improv shows at Trinity,
Yep.
and even more after you left. And then also like with the Christmas time, we would do an improv show to raise money for Toys for Tots or the food bank out in Brentwood, and kids they enjoyed it. And so after people graduated and became theater teachers, I had several students who used to ask me for my Canvas improv bag because in that bag was my clipboard and all the lists of the games and the bell and all the other stuff that we used, the flag for fouls or whatever.
Right.
Um, and I forget what somebody, I think it was Denise Scarvey when she was in Hicksville High School, said you should put that improv bag into a book.
Okay.
So I was doing a teacher workshop at a theater conference, um, and I basically shared that story. And Lindsay Price, who owns with her husband Theater Folk, they're a Canadian publishing company. She was at the website. She was at the workshop, and she said, "She's right. You should put that into a book." So Theater Folk published and basically it's a show. It's a book about how can I. My first title was "How to Do a High School Improv Show and Not Get Fired." Um,
Sure.
because a lot of high school theater teachers are afraid to do improv shows today because the world we're living in, and they're afraid you're going to just let kids say whatever comes to their mind. I'm going to get fired. Uh, so it creates a structure
Mhm.
and how we used to do fouls. If somebody said something inappropriate, we acknowledged it and they apologized to the audience, and the audience either accepted or didn't, and
Right.
then we gave them an attribute. But so lots of people. I mean, it sells about I don't know 100 copies a year to different schools, but the goal is here's everything you need to do your own improv show, and then take it from there. Yourself and
Okay.
build on it. Um,
I can honestly say I didn't realize you had written that until I started preparing for this podcast. So I was like, oh, I want to get that. Find out, is
yes,
it instructional in terms of what games to play or things like
yes.
that? Okay, so it does get into that
it,
detail of things.
it's not only what games, it's where they originated. Really did a lot of research to find out where did this game first start, and some games are called the same exact game as two different names on the East Coast and the West Coast.
Right.
Um, so it has its warm-ups, it's the actual games, it's the rules, how you play the game. But as all things improv, as you're doing it, something will pop into your head and you'll say, oh no, I'm going to try it that way. Like I was at an high school improv show in Illinois, and I saw these two big fuzzy dice, and I said, "What's that?" And he said, "Well, we do this thing just for fun. The tickets are I think the tickets were $6 or roll the dice.
Right.
So you could roll the dice, and you might get a $2 ticket, or you might get a $12 ticket." So I said, "All right, very good."
Yeah, I can honestly say I remember years later, I remember somebody mentioning the game 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon. And
Yes,
I was like, no, it's called keeperisms because that's what we did in the 80s.
right. That's exactly right. That was
Separate the
Steve
keeper stuff.
Zagers, right?
Yeah.
No, Charlie Zagers.
Yeah. Charlie Zegers and Brett
Phil,
Butler. Brett
and
Butler.
Brett Butler, and they could connect any breathing, living human being to
Right. To
Kiefer
Kiefer
Sutherland.
Sutherland with the same room, same time principle.
Yes,
And they were masters at it. Was I always remember like it was
and
amazing.
I believe that was before 6 Degrees of
I
Kevin
I
Bacon.
did I was, and that's why I was like, no, because you could really go either one of them. We just did Kiefer Sutherland at the time, because
Yes,
so um and in that, do you also talk about like different the basis of improv? And I know Viola
yeah,
Spolin was very big influence back in when we were doing it,
correct.
kind of thing.
I do Viola Spolin and Keith Johnstone, and then I talk about the professional improv troops like Comedy Sports.
Hmm.
If they that's a trademarked brand, so if you want to do Comedy Sports, you have to contact them to do that.
Yep.
But there's all kinds of variations to create your own improv shows as well, which for a lot of schools today who are having financial troubles. I mean, a lot of times I'll tell you I used money from our improv shows so that people could go to the Thespian Festival who couldn't afford it.
Right.
I just would tell them, don't worry about it, it's taken care of.
Right.
So that's where your
And
extra funds.
and there's a lot of those different troops and things like that, Comedy Sports, and there were 100 of those that popped up in the late 80s, early 90s. I know. I mean, even when I was still in New York with Brett and Charlie, we had some version of us going into the city
Yes,
pretty
to
monthly
this.
basis. We were going in and doing shows with some core, Doug McGinnis, and some other core group. Brendan Connor was one of them. It
Yep.
was always interchangeable of who went, but it was always that group of
And
people.
even when you were students, we went into that Stanislavski Open,
Right,
which
exactly.
was
That's
like a
what it
March
started.
Madness time of year. They did a round robin
Yep,
improv tournament,
yep, I
and
do.
we were almost no high school groups were there, so it was like a lot of people, oh, how cute, high school kids, and then they turned
Right,
out being really
right.
good.
I think I remember people going, "Oh, they're actually here to compete." We're
Yeah.
like, "Yeah, we are. We're not messing around." So,
Yep. But one year we were up against people from Chicago's Second City.
yep, yep, I do. And I remember sitting there going, "What am I doing with these people
Right.
on stage? I have no business being here."
They are so good.
So, and what about your next book, the School Theater Directors Playbook? Was it similar? Somebody said, "Hey, you've done this a lot."
Yeah, basically that was the book that I wrote to my 22-year-old self
Okay.
to save that person a lot of agita and stress over the years. And the most important part of that, of course, was ask for help.
Yeah.
Don't think you can just do it all by yourself because you're going to burn out. Um, but also building a team and the importance of that. So it's basically a book for first year high school theater teachers. And several colleges actually use that book now for their theater ed class.
Okay. Great.
So that's what I did that for. And I wrote that during the pandemic.
And for in terms of theater arts educators in that sense of it being a textbook, have you found a great response to that in that respect?
I've been very happy with
Okay.
I'm sure there's a few things that are already outdated, even though it's only a few years old.
Okay.
And I try to anticipate stuff that might be
Right.
and say that, but I think it all still applies. If you were going to be a first year teacher next September, it's a good resource to have.
Yeah, I think it probably is more applies to other people than you might think. I was my first guest on this podcast was Erin Sullivan. She wrote a book called Theatrical Baggage. It was called. She had been on tour for years and years and years, and that was one of the reasons I connected with her because I did the same thing. And we started talking about her book, and she was like, "Yeah, I think it's kind of dated now." And I was like, "No, because I actually read it again, and it's really not. There's just still a lot of, plus the fact that both of my sons are on tour, and I was like, no, I'm seeing them going through all this stuff. It's the same, it's a mix of, her book was a mix of, um, how to pack and what to expect, on a bus and how to, find the best place to be, but also, you know, just what you're going to experience going from town to town. You're going to experience different things and different people and that kind of thing.
Yes, I
And
heard that podcast actually. She was really good.
yeah, and I think my son's because my one son is home right now. He's on a break from his contract in Maine, and he started leafing through it, and he was just like, yeah, because he was on tour for years with the 1975 and like a Jurassic World stunt show. And he was like, "Yeah, no, this is all still pretty much the same." So it's not really as irrelevant as she thought it was at all.
Right, right. And my intent for this was there's so many books, theoretical books, textbooks on theater education. This was not that. This is how to pick a show, where to find the show, and from auditions through the strike party,
Right. Okay.
step by step by step.
And I think that's good to have because a lot of times in that, uh, in its that structure, a lot of times there was newer directors who don't have any idea on the whole outline. It's outline the entire thing before you even start because if you just jump into it, you're
Oh
jump
yeah.
you're in
I
trouble.
remember at my first show, one of the math teachers came up to me and said, "Oh, the show's soon. When do tickets go on sale?" And I smiled and I said, "Oh, soon." And then in my back of my brain, I said, "Oh crap, who does that? Where did where do you get tickets?"
Right. It's very so
I,
the first time I ever produced this a children's theater, people were like, "Oh, well, when's the theater getting set up?" Because in that case where we were going, I was like, "Oh yeah, I gotta go set up chairs. Nobody's gonna do that if I don't."
Correct.
So
So there's a guy I know in Maryland, Mike Deanna, who's phenomenal tech theater teacher over the years, and he's actually just sent me a draft of your school theater stage crew playbook, like how to assemble a effective stage crew and tech crew for high school productions.
that'd be interesting because that is getting harder and harder with the way technology is. It's
Correct.
definitely not the same as it was when, I was doing when I said this, I might have said it to somebody. I said when Jim said to me my sophomore year, there's a set of keys that goes along with your senior year for as being the TD, and I just was like kind of thinking, oh, that's really cool. But now it's like, yeah, those keys wouldn't get me very far. There's a lot more knowledge I have to pick up along the way,
Yeah.
um, and just the overwhelming amount of change that happens. Like even I joke around with them all the time, but my sons are far better sound guys than I have ever been, just because the technology has changed so much that I'm like, I haven't been sitting behind a soundboard in years. So,
Right. And lighting too. Lighting is amazing. It's
yep,
nothing is the same from when I last designed light for a show.
right,
And when we did our first high school production of Bright Star down in Florida, in Winter Garden, Florida, and the students do the designing of the sets, the lighting. And I saw the girl that was the lighting designer, and I said, "What are you doing?" And she was actually controlling the light board from her phone.
right, right.
And I said, "All right, the brave new world, we're in it."
We're done. So, yeah, no, I mean, I was actually in a leadership retreat this last week at Duke, and we were talking. Somebody was asking me who is not in the department and somewhere else in student affairs, and they didn't really know me, and they're like, "Well, you know all these the lights and sound," and I was like, "Well, at this point in my career, I know who to tell you to talk to."
Yeah,
I mean, I could sit down at a light board and I could do it. It would take me a really long time to get there, but and I would prefer to look at you and go, here's my colleague. She can take care of it really fast. Go there.
correct.
So,
Yeah.
um, all right. Well, let me ask you one more thing about some of the presentations and workshops you do. What are most of those workshops about that when you go around to the US and UK and stuff like that?
Most of them are well, there's two sides. The ones I enjoy most are the ones for theater teachers.
Okay.
In fact, I'll be doing that in Seattle in 2 weeks. I call it hard work isn't easy, and it's licensing and directing tips for theater educators.
Okay.
Um, and it's some things that now that I've learned on this side of the licensing world that I think teachers should know, like don't be afraid to ask. Um, if you have a theater that's 1,200 seats because you have to have assemblies there, but you never sell more than 500 tickets, you can contact the licensing company with a document from your administration saying, "We will only print 500 tickets. Can we change the size of our house to 500?"
Right.
And you can. But
Yes.
most teachers don't know that. They don't know that, and they're paying. way beyond what they can afford for a show that they're never going to sell, 1,000 tickets.
Right.
Little things like that. And then we go into, dealing with the difficult casts and things like that. And then I will sometimes do workshops for teachers on, again, sometimes teachers and students, how to do your own improv shows. And we'll actually do a mini improv show at the workshop. But I'm sort of fading out of all of that, that semi-retiring out of this. It
Okay.
occurred to me not too long ago. I was in my 20s in the 70s, and now I'm in my 70s in the 20s. Uh,
Okay.
so it's a nice balance. But so the workshops I'm working on now is actually working on new musicals, helping our production division get new things started.
Okay. And that in
So
terms of creating the ways that they can go about doing those musicals, or
yeah, Steve started a whole production division here. So for example, last weekend we were down in North Carolina working on this piece called Wild Heart, which is it's a Joan of Arc story,
Mhm.
contemporarily told with music from Pink and Weezer and Melissa Etheridge.
Okay. Cool.
And it was a wonderfully performed production, which will be releasing soon. Well, actually, we'll be announcing the production division of the company soon. But we're also working on adapting the 2012 film Joyful Noise that Dolly Parton and Queen
Yeah.
Latifah were in.
Hmm.
That's going to be developed in Georgia, I believe. And we've got, I think, maybe up to 10 projects that are in the queue right now. The one that you would get a personal kick out of is adapting the movie Galaxy Quest. That was the movie with Tim Allen and Sigourney Weaver
Yeah. Uh-huh.
into a musical comedy.
Oh
And
wow.
the guy that wrote the screenplay is also David Howard. He wrote the stage play, and it's really good. And one of his dear friends, Brett Simmons, who's a composer for Disney, he wrote the original score.
Okay. I don't know if you know.
Yeah.
I just worked on Bull Durham in Durham.
Oh,
They
I
did doing a musical version of
yeah,
Bull,
I saw that was happening.
and they had Blake Shelton here was is rating the book for it, and it's definitely great to have the original screenwriter involved with the project
Yep,
because he's he's aware enough to go, okay, I have to change this for the stage, but these are the things I have to keep the essence of the movie there, and that's
correct.
that's his goal was to do that. But he was also I was glad to see that he was open to going, yeah, that's not going to work on stage. You
Yep.
know? And
And no, and that's what's same with David with Galaxy Quest. He gets it. So you said, is Blake Shelton doing the music?
no, he just wrote the book.
Oh wow.
I apologize, but I can't remember the name of the woman who wrote the music. She's a North Carolina, southeastern. It's very got a very bluegrassy rock, indie rock feel to
Cool.
it. They're doing it at Paper Mill in August. They brought it up.
Yes, I saw that. Yeah.
So if you guys get a chance, I'd highly suggest it because if they use the same cast, it'd be great. A guy named Nick Walker was played the lead, Crash Davis, and just phenomenal performer, really was.
Cool.
Um, and just the whole cast in general was really good. They just I was very happy because it was one of my favorite movies of all time is Bull Durham. I mean, I have a Bull Durham poster in my office because you know and I know the guy who painted the bull for the um,
Wow.
movie piece, and that was the smoke out of it and stuff like that. I know that the stagehand who built that, stuff like that. So it was important that I see that get done well, and it was. So I was very happy about that. So.
That's great. No, look forward to seeing it.
Well, Jim, thank you for joining me today. I really appreciate it. I'm sure we could sit here and talk about old times for hours and hours and hours, but
Yep.
people probably wouldn't get what we're talking about.
Exactly.
So, let me just say this to everybody. Thank you for joining us on this episode. And if you like what you see, please join us again. And we'll see you next time. Thanks a lot. Keep the faith.